Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. This was the venue for the first round of meetings on this trip by the Trinidad and Tobago delegation. The delegation arrived in Washington, D.C. on the evening of Monday, May 2nd, 2016. The following morning, discussions were held between Prime Minister Rowley and the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne Frederick. These discussions centered around collaboration in the areas of healthcare training and other human resource issues with a view to improving healthcare delivery in Trinidad and Tobago. Prime Minister also met on Tuesday with President of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. Luis Alberto Moreno, at the bank's headquarters in Washington, D.C. Immediately following the meeting with the Inter-American Development Bank, Prime Minister Rowley and the Trinidad and Tobago delegation attended a cocktail reception in their honor, co-hosted by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and the Council of the Americas. The reception served as both the close of the Council of the Americas' 46th Annual Washington Conference and the opening of the U.S. Caribbean Central American Energy Summit. Additionally, on Tuesday, Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Senator Dennis Moses represented Trinidad and Tobago at a meeting with the U.S. Treasury Department on issues surrounding correspondent banking. It is notable that this issue was also a point of discussion at the recently held 27th intersessional meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community in Placencia, Belize. Wednesday, May 4th, 2016, saw U.S. Vice President Joe Biden formally open the U.S. Caribbean Central American Energy Summit. Vice President Biden then went on to introduce Dr. Keith Rowley, who gave a presentation on energy sustainability in the Caribbean region. Dr. Rowley also went on to give the feature address at the plenary lunch session of the Energy Summit.
I want to thank the United States, Vice President Biden and his team for giving us this opportunity to spend time discussing and being enthused and encouraged to focus more on this very fundamental area of energy sustainability. The Caribbean Community CARICOM recognizes that given the enormous scale of the resources of our respective countries, renewable energy can and should be contributing more to the regional energy mix, thereby increasing the prospects for energy security. For example, within the community, the aggregated contribution of renewable power to the electricity sector has almost doubled over the last decade, from around 5% in 2005 to 9.1% in 2015. We have now set a target for aggregated contribution of renewable energy to power generation within the region of 47% by 2027. Every country within CARICOM has either updated or is in the process of updating energy policies and electricity regulations to promote greater use of renewable energy and increase efficiency in the way in which energy is produced, delivered, and used. My own country, Trinidad and Tobago, has been making steady progress. We are the only net energy producer within CARICOM, with as much as 45% of GDP and nearly 60% of government revenue derived from oil and gas. Nonetheless, in October 2015, my administration set a target of 10% renewable power generation by 2021. This will require the development of around 150 megawatts of renewable energy resources, and we are looking to solar and wind to provide options for this. Legislation developed as part of a comprehensive policy for renewable energy in Trinidad and Tobago is also on the cards. On the efficiency side, blessed by a power sector in which natural gas accounts for 98% of generation, Trinidad and Tobago has achieved around 60% efficiency, almost twice the regional average.
Talks with the U.S. on matters of national security in the Caribbean were also held, and Dr. Rowley, as CARICOM's lead on national security, played a major role at the session. On Thursday, May 5th, Prime Minister Rowley and members of the delegation met with Mr. David Rubenstein, chairman of the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group is a major investment conglomerate, and the purpose of that meeting was to attract investment to Trinidad and Tobago. That meeting marked the end of the Washington leg of the Prime Minister's official overseas trip. It was then off to New York City. Prime Minister Rowley was invited by the Medgar Evers College to deliver the keynote address at the college's inaugural International Education Awards presentation ceremony. Trinidad and Tobago nationals make up some 25% of the international student population at the college, and they were well represented at the event. Following the New York engagement, the delegation then traveled on to London. A meeting was held in London between the Trinidad and Tobago delegation and the top officials of British Petroleum. Accompanying Prime Minister Rowley were Minister Stuart Young and Professor Ken Julian, while BP was represented by Group Chief Executive Officer Mr. Bob Dudley and Regional President Mr. Norman Christie. On Sunday, May 8th, the delegation left London for Ghana, where they were joined by members of the business community of Trinidad and Tobago. Immediately upon arrival at the hotel in Ghana, Prime Minister Rowley called a meeting for the expanded delegation to brief them about the program for the coming days. Monday, May 9th, began with Prime Minister Rowley paying an official visit to His Excellency John Mahama at Flagstaff House, Kanda, Accra. Dr. Rowley's reception from President Mahama commenced with an inspection of the Guard of Honor and a 21-gun salute. Thereafter, both leaders and their respective delegates engaged in official bilateral talks, which resulted in the signing of a general cooperation agreement between the government of Ghana and the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Senator Dennis Moses, signed on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, while his counterpart from Ghana, Ms. Hannah Tete, did so on her country's behalf. In addition to the government-to-government agreement, a memorandum of understanding on the joint identification and development of commercially viable natural gas projects was also signed by Thomas Manu, acting CEO of the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, and Mr. Jerry Brooks, chairman of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago. President Mahama then hosted the delegation to a state luncheon at which Prime Minister Rowley gave an address.
And coming into being as a nation and being invited to be a member of the UN, it was Ghana that seconded the resolution for Trinidad and Tobago's acceptance at our entry at the UN. And that time, the world was a place of walls and restrictions. And there wasn't very much that we could have done then. But the world is very different now, where there are much fewer walls. And the integration of international business and international trade makes distance no longer an impediment to our common future. So even though we are distant and separated by the Atlantic Ocean, given what happens in today's world, and given what we in Trinidad and Tobago have become, we are in a position to cooperate and to do things that we hadn't dreamt of at the time when we became nations in the 60s. So, receiving us in the way that you have, with the enthusiasm that you have, and those of us who have come here bringing specific areas of interest, it holds out to us great promise for successful cooperation going forward. And we anticipate that in the not too distant future, that there will be tangible expressions of economic activity and cooperation between the interests of Ghana and the interests of Trinidad and Tobago.
Following the luncheon, the delegation was accompanied by the President and other high-ranking officials on a tour of the Tema Oil Refinery and the Volta Aluminium Company Limited. By the end of the day, both leaders acknowledged their interest in further exploring opportunities for mutually beneficial collaborative efforts with a view to economic development in both countries. Monday's final activity was a cocktail reception for the business community held at the Movenpick Ambassador Hotel. The following day, Tuesday, began with the delegation paying a visit to the George Padmore Memorial Library located in Ridge, Accra. George Padmore was a Trinidad and Tobago-born intellectual who was a valued advisor and friend of the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. The library visit also included a wreath-laying and a tree-planting ceremony in honor of Mr. Padmore. The day's proceedings then continued with a guided tour of the Atwabo gas processing facility. Following the tour of the gas plant, the delegation then made its way for a courtesy call on the village chief, which is a long-standing African tradition. They then moved on to Castle Elmina, where they were treated to a guided tour of the castle, which was used as a facility for holding and shipping slaves during the slave trade era. Wednesday, May 11th, marked the final day of the Ghana leg. The day began with a series of private meetings between business representatives of both nations. Following these meetings, Prime Minister Rowley and his official delegation attended the opening of a new branch of HFC Bank. Republic Bank Limited is now majority owner of HFC in Ghana. The delegation then made its way to the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park for a guided tour of the mausoleum, and Prime Minister Rowley laid a wreath in honor of Ghana's first president. Immediately following the wreath-laying ceremony, Prime Minister, accompanied by the delegation, paid a courtesy call on former President of Ghana, Jerry John Rawlings. The delegation left Ghana on Wednesday evening to arrive in London early Thursday, 12 May 2016, on the invitation of Prime Minister David Cameron to attend a two-day anti-corruption summit. The summit was convened with a view to stemming and eventually stamping out the scourge of corruption worldwide. Prime Minister Rowley was part of a private breakfast meeting hosted by Prime Minister Cameron, which included the head of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the head of the World Bank. Friday, May 13th, the final day of this grueling 12-day overseas trip. Prime Minister Rowley, accompanied by the Honourable Stuart Young, attended meetings at the Cabinet Office in Whitehall in London and at the National Crime Agency headquarters, also in London. Matters related to national security and mutual assistance were discussed at these meetings. The delegation then left London on Saturday, 14 May, to arrive in Trinidad and Tobago, where the Prime Minister held a media briefing.
The sessions focused on the role that energy played and posed to the Caribbean economies insofar as they were preparing themselves to treat with the changed environment in the world energy market, and also the requirements to continue to make commitments for use of sustainable energy. One report was of particular interest to Trinidad and Tobago, and it was the United States announcement of its own position with respect to its own energy security and that of the region, where we were informed that at this time, what we had been anticipating had begun, and that is that the United States had shipped 8 cargoes of LNG outwards and is now a competitor with Trinidad and Tobago. That is a development of great significance to us here. At the level of national security, we had extensive discussions with high-level U.S. authorities on an evaluation of the Caribbean's national security apparatus and our preparedness to treat with the challenges in front of us. And these discussions centered around the kinds of assistance the U.S. is giving and the effects that they're having on us and what more needs to be done, as there's always more to be done.